Well, I'm so pleased and just honored tonight to be able to have our special guest here for True Talk that has a rich heritage. I consider him to be a living legend. Not only a preacher extraordinaire, a father, a husband, the first African American United States ambassador to the United Nations, a congressman, a mayor, a civic leader, civil rights leader, a confidant to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and has been a friend of the Bronner family for many years. Will you welcome our special True Talk guest tonight, Ambassador Andrew Jackson Young Jr. Wow. And he's got the right last name, too. He's 84 years young. He just has a youthful spirit still about him. Welcome. So great to have you to be here with us in this session here of True Talk. And I want to give some of these young folks a perspective about life. You've lived long enough now to have figured some things out. Young people seem to know the rules, but the seasoned folks know the exceptions to the rule. And you know a few exceptions and have an understanding now and a perspective that only time gives you. And I want to help so many of the folks that are watching, those who are here live, on just discovering how God led you over the course of your life. You've done some incredible things, and I'm sure that when you were younger, you probably never thought that you would do many of the things that you've done and have many of the experiences that you have had. But I want you to be able to share with them a snapshot picture so that they can see how God led you from one thing to another. So much of what you were led in your life, you were thrust in. People just think that you pray and God just, you heard a voice from heaven, go it this way, do this, do that, do the other. You were working as a youngster in New York City for the National Council of Churches in the youth department. And I think you were called to a pastorate from there. How did that happen? Tell us about that.
Well, actually, I was called to a pastorate before I got there.
Yes.
And I left, I was in seminary, and that's another long story. Well, let me just make it short. I kind of stumbled through college, too young, and I wasn't crazy and I wasn't wild, but I was free. I was really a free spirit. And when I graduated, I said, oh, Lord, I'm supposed to be grown, a man, know what I'm supposed to do, and I don't have a clue. For me, first of all, I grew up in New Orleans, and I went to a church nursery school. Wow. And I don't know how early I went, but I stayed there, say from 3 to 6. Mm-hmm. But by the time I got 6, I could read and write and count, and and so when I went to public schools, at 6 years old, they put me in the 3rd grade.
Wow.
And mostly 3rd graders were 9 to 12, yep. And I was 6. Wow. Because it connects to the rest of the story, I'll admit that I got put out of 3rd grade. Because I had a choice of either getting along with the biggest and the baddest folks in the class or the teachers. Well, the teachers could spank me or send me home, but the biggest, baddest boys in the class could protect me. So I got put out because I was playing with an ice pick in the back of the room, playing Mumbly Peg. Now, I'm going to jump because I went back to school the next day, but I didn't see the young fella. He never came back. In my senior year, before my senior year at Howard, I knew I was messing up. I didn't know whether I was going to flunk out or graduate. I was lifeguard at a swimming pool in the neighborhood where we grew up. Who comes in but this same boy? Wow. But he was an addict. I mean, he had needle tracks all in his veins and his legs, and he stumbled in the swimming pool, almost drowned. When we pulled him out and he sat on the side, he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" Wow. And I said, "No, where from?" He said, "We got put out of Miss Sarah Vokeland's class in Bellina C. Jones School in 3rd grade." And I said, "But you didn't come back. Where have you been?" He said, "I've been in and out of every reform school and penitentiary in the state of Louisiana." Wow. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm in college, but I'm messing up, and I don't know whether I'm going to drop out or flunk out. And I'm thinking about," he said, "Wait a minute." And he started cussing. Wow. And he gave me one of those old Richard Pryor kind of cussings. "You low down, sorry. If I had the chances you had, wow, I wouldn't mess them up." Wow. And I mean, he really lit into me. And he said, "Look, I'm as smart as you." And he didn't have to tell me that. Yeah. He said, "If I'd had the chances you had, I would not mess them up. You got to go back to school, you got to graduate, and you got to find a way to make the world better for people like me." Wow. So I got my charge from my 3rd grade buddy, wow, who had been through hell and back, yeah, and didn't want me to waste my life. So that's when I began to really feel serious about life. And when I graduated,
it sounds like you saved his life and he saved yours.
Maybe. He saved mine.
Wow.
But God works in mysterious ways, and you never know how God's going to reach you. Now, my parents had been telling me that all along. Yeah. It didn't mean anything coming from my parents. That's what parents are supposed to do. So I always, I always thought with my children, I want them to get to know everybody. I don't want them to just know nice folks. Yeah. I want them to get to know life. And that's the reason I believe in public schools. Yeah. Because that's where I became an ambassador. Wow. Wow. See, in elementary school. Yeah. Wow. Having to get back and forth. Because in my neighborhood, they had it was pretty much all white for his children. There were a lot of black folk living there, but they didn't have little children. And but it was an Irish grocery store, an Italian bar. The Nazi party was on the 3rd corner. Wow. And they were Highland Hitler. And so my daddy had to explain to me about racism and white supremacy, well, actually, when I was 4 years old. Wow. Because to get to the grocery store, I had to deal with these kind of Nazi type of folk. There was no protection and no defense but God and your own mind and spirit. Wow. And so he used to say to me all the time, "Look, don't get mad, get smart. These people are sick." Yeah, wow. And if you get angry and upset, you get caught in their sickness. You cannot beat them at their game. The only thing you can do is keep your mind calm. Yeah. If you get angry, the blood runs from your eye, your brain into your fists, wow, and your feet, and you're more than likely going to do something stupid, wow, and get yourself hurt. He said, "That's why," and he used to box with me and tap me in the face and teach me how to duck and bob and concentrate on what I'm doing. But if I ever swung wild at him, he knocked the daylights out of me. And he said, see, you're losing your cool.
Wow.
You lose your cool, you're going to lose your head.
Wow. Wow.
And so that's sort of where, I mean, I was almost being prepared for what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Wow.
Back then.
Wow.
So, but it took me till I was finished college to realize that maybe God did have a plan for me.
Yeah. Wow.
And I didn't know what it was, but I said, if everything else has got a purpose,
Yeah.
the trees have a purpose, the grass has a purpose. I was on a mountaintop, and I didn't hear any voices, but something spoke within my heart that you are somebody. You were put here on this earth for a purpose.
Yeah.
You don't need to know what it is. You'll find it one day at a time.
Wow.
And so I went on, and everything that happened seemed to have a purpose. I ended up with a little country church down in Thomasville in Beachton, Georgia.
Wow.
And that's where I learned about poor folks in the rural South. And I first went to Marion, Alabama, where I bumped into my wife, who was in a little town. But she and Coretta King went to the same high school.
Wow.
And they knew each other, and both of them had very bitter racial experiences. And so they grew up in the cruel South, and really suffered with it. But it was both of them's faith. And they were very strong women who were tough-minded and not bitter.
Wow. Yes.
And they were some Quaker teachers that realized they were smart and arranged for them to go to college. Jean went to Manchester College in Indiana. Coretta went to Antioch College in Ohio, and because they got scholarships. And they learned about nonviolence, but they also, Jean got a scholarship to go overseas.
Wow.
And study and work in a work camp in Germany in 1953.
Wow.
Well, by that time, I had known that this was the woman I was going to marry.
Yeah.
But she didn't want to be bothered with a preacher. And my daddy didn't want me to be a preacher. He said all the preachers he knew were either poor or crooked. And he said, I'm not going to waste my money on you being a preacher. If you're going to be a preacher, you're on your own. And it's the best thing he could have done for me.
Wow.
Because he let go and I let God.
Yeah, wow. Wow.
See?
Wow.
And one day at a time, it all happened. I had bad grades, so I couldn't get into Yale Divinity School, where your brother is.
My son.
Oh, God bless you. But I went to Hartford Seminary and just walked into the dean's office and said, look, I'm working with the church, but I don't know anything about the Bible. Can I sit in on some courses? And his answer was, if you sit in on 3, I can give you a scholarship.
Wow.
See? And so I walked into campus and got a scholarship. And that was before he saw my grades from Howard. And when he saw my grades, he said, you're lucky or blessed. I said, it's probably more blessed, because something like this doesn't happen unless there's some meaning to it.
Wow.
But then I went to Marion, Alabama.
Yes.
And met Jean and followed her to Europe. We married after I finished seminary. We went back to Thomasville, Georgia, because it was a little church we had 2 churches, 35 members in one church and about 15 in the other.
Wow.
And she taught school, and I had a ministry to a community. And the first summer we were there, Maynard Jackson's grandfather asked me to lead a voter registration drive.
Wow.
And I said, okay. And we were in Albany shopping, coming back through a little town around Moultrie, Georgia. And I found myself, this is 1956 now, in the middle of a Klan rally.
Wow.
I mean, we turned around the curve and there were a couple of hundred people in sheets. And I said, oh, Lord, what are we going to do? So I wasn't into nonviolence then.
Yeah.
And as a country girl, Jean used to like to shoot. That was a good date. I mean, we'd sit out and you know, they had a little gulch, and she'd pick out a can or a bottle, and she'd shoot 2, 3 bottles, and then she'd hand me the gun. So that was a good afternoon shooting fest in the country. But when we got to Thomasville, I said, look, I'm not going to run from these folks. I'm going to face them down. And she said, I said, I want you to sit in the window with a gun. And I want you to point it at the person I'm talking to. And then we can reason together from a position of strength. And she said, I can't do that. I said, why? What's the matter? I said, you're a good shot. She said, yeah, but I cannot point a gun at a human being. I said, what are you talking about, human being? That's the Ku Klux Klan. See? And she said, yeah, and you're supposed to be a preacher.
Oh, wow.
I said, well, what's that got to do with it? She said, if you ever forget that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, you need to quit preaching.
Wow.
I said, good God Almighty. What is this woman talking about? I said, this is a flat. I mean, this is a shack. If they just throw a cigarette up here, they can go up and smoke, and we got a 3-month-old baby in there, and we'll all die. She said, so?
Wow.
I said, what do you mean? Don't you preach about the cross and the resurrection? I said, God Almighty, have mercy. See? And she said, look, if you don't believe it, let's go do something else.
Wow.
And so I think that was a test. And then that's sort of where I learned how to deal with the white folks in the movement. And I said, well, what? And I said, the mayor is runs the hardware store. I said, I'm going down to see him and let him know what's going on. And so that's when I learned that the business community can control the police and the racists. Yeah. Because he was head of the hardware store, but he got on the phone and called Sunnyland Packing Company and Flowers Bakery, the 2 largest employers. And the 3 of them decided that they didn't want any race troubles and that the Klan could have a rally on the courthouse steps, but they could not march in the black community. Wow. And they had a right to have their rally Saturday night. John Wesley Dobbs came down and we started our voter registration drive Sunday morning. But the sheriff controlled the Klan because the business community put the pressure on the sheriff. Wow. And that's the formula for social change. Yeah. Wow. That we followed in Birmingham. Everybody knows about the dogs and the fire hoses, but that was the tip of the iceberg. Yep. Underneath, after the demonstrations, I'd have to put on a shirt and tie and go downtown, and we went to the Episcopal diocesan house and got the Episcopal bishop to try to get a few businessmen together, and we'd sit there and talk to them and try to explain to them. And we were saying, and Dr. King put it very wonderfully, he said, look, we're not here to condemn you. You're not at fault because you were born white. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that we were born Negro, is what we said then. Yeah. He said, this is the way God made us. But God placed us in an unjust situation. Yeah. Now, it's not your fault and it's not our fault, but if we don't do something about it, we're not going to be able to get along. And he said, now we apologized for putting you in this trouble because after all, we realized we've been supporting segregation. Wow. He said, we financed it. She said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we spent our money when you wouldn't give us jobs, when you had signs where we couldn't drink water, we couldn't try on clothes we couldn't eat at a lunch counter. And he said, that's our fault. We're not blaming you for that. But what we're saying is, we're not going to do that no more. That unless you take down those signs, unless you hire the women that you call maids to be clerks and give them wages and commissions like you do white folk, then we can't shop here.
Wow.
In fact, we're not going to shop anywhere. So for 90 days, from January right on through till Easter, nobody in Birmingham bought anything but food and medicine.
Wow.
No clothes, no shoes, no cars. We shut down the economy.
Wow. Wow.
See? And we never cussed anybody. We never got mad with anybody. We found that it was more powerful being cool and calm and soft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like my daddy trained me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like your daddy trained you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your daddy was very much like my daddy.
Yeah.
And he always had a story. My daddy was a dentist.
Yep.
So people came to him not just to get the teeth fixed. They came to him for advice.
Yeah.
So, and they came to listen to him. And that's the way people came to your father.
Yeah.
He was the pastor of Hunter Street.
Yeah.
Had a bigger church than you did and a whole lot more troubles to deal with.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's absolutely true. Wow.
But from there on, everything happened.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know what I was getting into when I went to Thomasville, but I led Bible study at a conference in Florida, and they offered me that job in New York. And I said, no, I don't want to go to New York. I want to stay in the South. And Gene wanted to stay in the South. And our superintendent said, but we have a young family that is just coming out of school, and they need a job, and they need a church. And I thought if you went on to New York, we could put them here.
Wow.
So I got run out of a church of 50 members and given a position with a national organization with all of the Protestant denominations all over the country. And they were the ones that sent me around the world.
Wow.
And I went to England, and I went to Switzerland, and I went to Latin America.
Wow.
All meeting with church people.
Wow.
And I got a worldview that you don't get in school.
Yeah, that's so true. Wow. Wow. That was preparing.
But
you.
everywhere I went, I found missionaries already there.
Yeah.
Preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
And almost everywhere good is happening in the world, somebody's been there for the last 100 years preaching.
Wow. Wow.
The gospel is a powerful mechanism for peace,
Yes.
prosperity,
Yes.
and communion with each other.
Wow. I love it. I love it. Wow. Tell me how you left New York from being at the National Council of Churches.
Well, actually, it was your congressman's fault. We turned on the television, and there was John Lewis in the Nashville sit-ins. And my wife, you know the kind of woman she was.
God led you through your wife several times, didn't he?
That's right. And she said, let's go. We just bought a house in Queens.
Wow.
I had a good job. She was getting a master's in education from Queens College, and there the tuition was only $16 a semester. So even though she had 2 babies and 1 on the way, she said, I cannot afford to be in New York and not get a degree.
Wow.
If it's just gonna cost me $32 a year.
Wow.
See? And here we are toward the end of the year. Her thesis is due the end of May. The baby's due the 1st of June, the 3rd baby. And this is like March. And she says, we see John Lewis and the Nashville sit-in story. And she said, it's time for us to go home. I said, we are home. We just bought this house. She said, no, sell it. I said, what's the matter? She said, we're going home. I said, where? She said, I don't know. And I said, what are we going to do for a job? She said, I don't know, but quit this one.
Wow.
And let's see where the Lord leads us. And I quit the job. I got a job offer in Tennessee, and then they shut that school down.
Wow.
because they were integration advocates. And there we were with a baby on the way, a thesis due, no house, no job, and no sense of direction. And lo and behold, she said, well, I'm going back to my mother's, and by the time I get settled, the Lord will have guided you. And guess where the Lord landed me?
Where is that?
On Auburn Avenue,
Wow.
across the hall from Martin Luther King.
Wow.
And I did not want to be a part of SCLC.
SCLC. Yep.
But Dora McDonald, his secretary, said, you here in Atlanta,
Tell them what SCLC stands for. These young
Southern
people.
Christian Leadership Conference
Yes.
was Martin Luther King's organization, where he got together 100 preachers from all across the South in New Orleans in 1957, and they had just set up the headquarters on Auburn Avenue, right next door to Big Bethel Church.
Yep.
And the YMCA was across the street on Butler Street, and that's where I was living.
Wow.
And so Dora McDonald said, now, you are here in Atlanta, and your wife is in Alabama. If you don't have something to do, you're going to get in trouble in Atlanta. And I said, well, what, can I help? She said, can you help me with Dr. King's mail? And so I said, sure, be glad to try. And she gave me a great big cardboard box packed with letters of people writing him. So while my wife was recovering, while I'm looking for a house, I started answering Dr. King's mail. And he liked my answers.
Wow.
You know, and one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I was traveling with him and doing research for him, and just being an intellectual flunky. You know, whatever he needed. If I had to look up something, if I had to go get his clothes from cleaners, if I had to buy him some barbecue from LX Barbecue Heaven, because he did most of his speeches, and he really worked on his sermons.
Yeah.
And if he had an address, he was always doing it at night. And the way he kept himself awake was going to LX Barbecue Heaven on Hunter Street, right next to Ralph Abernathy's church.
Yes.
Well, right there, Hunter, and right down the street from Bronner Brothers.
Yeah, yeah.
And he'd eat barbecue, and then he couldn't go to sleep. And he'd stay up, you know, he couldn't lay down. But that's the way he stayed awake to do his writing. So all of Martin's great speeches were inspired by some greasy barbecue to keep him awake.
Wow.
But that's how I ended up in SCLC.
Wow.
And when SCLC was over, I was trying to get Julian Bond or Vernon Jordan or somebody to run for Congress.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to do it. So Harry Belafonte said, okay. And he didn't even ask me. He picked up the phone and called his wife and said, we have to put together a fundraiser here in New York. And she said, what for? And he said, Andy's running for Congress. And I said, no, that's not the way I see it. He said, who else is going to run?
Wow.
So, and nobody wants to run. You got to run. And so that's how I got to Congress. And then,
so the Lord didn't just speak to you and just tell you to run for Congress?
no, you know, I always say that it is true in the Bible. It's 21st chapter of the book of Numbers, where God spoke through Balaam's ass. And when nobody else would hear him, God got to the donkey. See? So that's why I tell Harry Belafonte, see, I guess God can speak through you too. But the call of God comes from strange places.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was right.
Yes.
And then when I left, I didn't win easy. And the only reason I won was that the black community and a few good white folks decided that they were going to vote for the best person
Wow.
and not vote on the basis of color.
Wow.
So I got a nice little group of white supporters, and even though it poured down rain, the turnout in the black community, and your daddy helped me go to all the beauty parlors.
Yep.
You got people sitting in the chair. You can get them told. You can educate people. I mean, that's been the education platform.
Yeah.
And so everybody has something to talk about, what it means to send somebody like me to Congress.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we had a 74% turnout
Wow. Wow.
in a pouring down rain.
My God.
It rained all day.
That was a miracle.
So leaders can't make it unless the people stand up and prop them up.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I mean, as great as you are, this wouldn't be here without
Right. Right.
the wonderful support that you have. This many people coming out on a Thursday night. Let me tell you something. I stayed in Thomasville and Beachton 4 years. And all together, all of the preaching I did, I didn't touch this many people. My first revival, now that's when the Lord really tests you. I had a revival trying to attract members to the church, and I really prayed about it. It poured down rain, and 7 people showed up. 7 people showed up at my first revival. See? And members wouldn't let us call it off. Said, no, you got to preach. And I realized that it didn't matter whether it was 1 or 100 or 1,000 or, well, like this live streaming you do.
Yes.
I guess it was sometime last year we had John Bryan of Operation Hope was at my house. And I was upset about something, and I started complaining and preaching and lecturing and whatever I do. Hadn't had anything to drink. And it was just me letting out whatever was in me. And he asked, can I record this? I said, yeah, I don't care. Yeah. And pretty soon, people were talking along the bottom. And he said, you see, there are people listening.
Wow.
And I must have gone on for a half hour or more. And by the time we finished, he said, look here, 23,000 people.
Wow.
And we were sitting around the table talking about, I don't know what.
Wow.
But by the weekend, he called me and he said, you're almost close to 100,000 hits on this.
Wow.
So I'm saying that to say, I didn't know about that. You all obviously know about that because God only knows how many people are streaming to share in what you and the bishop have brought together in this community.
Wow.
So you never know how God is using you, and you never know the purpose for which you're being used.
Wow.
And you never know who you're reaching.
Yeah, that's so true. Wow. Wow. Now tell us how you got to in the mayoral race for the city of Atlanta. Was that ever your dream as a youngster?
Well, let me tell you, I had been to the Congress and I'd been to the United Nations and I loved it, but I left note on such a short notice because I told President Carter that I had to follow the teachings of Jesus and Martin Luther King, and there would be time when the State Department didn't agree with that.
Yeah, wow.
And when I had to take a choice, I said, I'm gonna stick with Jesus and Martin Luther King.
Wow.
See? And if it gets too embarrassing for you, you won't have to ask me to leave, I'll leave.
Wow, yeah.
And he didn't want me to leave, but if I had not left after trying to get Palestinians and Israelis together, and I'd been asked by the Israelis to try to help them open up the Palestinians, and I'd been asked by the Palestinians, But the State Department was uncomfortable with it because New York is the home of the United Nations.
Yep.
And the volatile relationships there. And I said, if I didn't get out of here, there'd probably be a race riot in front of the UN. And that was not cool. Because if the Jewish community got upset and came after me, I had been out in the street campaigning with David Dinkins to be mayor and stuff like that. So I'd spoken at a lot of churches, and they don't get too many ambassadors to come into a church on Sunday morning or a school in the middle of the week. And anytime I had time, I was out basically preaching.
Wow.
And if there had been somebody messing with me, the Harlem and Brooklyn would have come to defend me, and I did not want any violent conflict. So I said, and again, Gene was ready to come back to Georgia. But I came back broke.
Wow.
With 4 children by that time.
Wow.
And 3 of them ready to go to college. One was in law school, one was in engineering school, and the second one had just been accepted to Duke, and offered a scholarship. And my crazy wife said, scholarships are for poor people.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
We're not poor.
Wow.
We have to take care of our own children's education, because we'd be robbing some poor person of an educational opportunity.
Wow.
So I figured I had to work. And the mayor's salary was $50,000 a year.
Wow.
See, and I was broke. I didn't know why God put me in this situation, but do you remember a lady by the name of Susie Laborde?
I do remember that name.
Susie Laborde was the president of the senior citizen housing units all over town. And she was a nice lady. I'd say old lady, because she was 5 years younger than I am now, and I don't think I'm old. But just like I wobbled in here with bad knees, she came in with a cane, and she said, look here, boy, when you came here, you wasn't nothing. And we made you somebody.
Wow. And
we sent you all over the world with Jimmy Carter, Martin Luther King. I said, well, Martin Luther King really made me. She said, we made him too. She said, now we need you, and you ain't got time for us.
Wow.
We done wasted our time on you.
Wow.
And she turned around and slammed the door so hard, I had to run for mayor. And I've never known whether she did that on her own.
Wow.
Or whether Maynard Jackson set her up. Because we had changed Atlanta. We had desegregated Atlanta. But Maynard started desegregating the money.
Wow.
And they were angry with him because he wouldn't build the airport and he wouldn't build MARTA unless minorities and women had a chance at least 25% of each contract.
Wow. And
he held it up for a year. And so people were mad with him, and they didn't want any more of these uppity Negroes. See? But we were in danger of losing that.
Yeah, wow.
So I ended up having to run for mayor, and there's an age difference. I was about 50. When Maynard got to be mayor, he was about 30.
Wow.
32, I think. He was a little impetuous, and by that time, I was a cool, seasoned diplomat.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it wasn't a conflict to have affirmative action. I said, we're growing and we're doing well because everybody has a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
I said, now, when it came to the Olympics, I said, look, we think we need at least 40% of these dollars on every contract. They said, that's too much. I said, no. If we get 40%, that's 40% of $1 billion. That's $400 million. You get 60% of this billion, but there's going to be another 10 billion coming into this community every year.
Yeah.
And you're going to get 90% of that.
Wow.
See, it's good math, good business. It's not civil rights, it's not politics. This is just good common sense.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you do have a point. I never thought of it that way.
Wow.
So then they bought into the affirmative action. And the day we won the Olympics, UPS, ING is now Voya,
Yep.
and not Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons downtown announced that they were coming to Atlanta.
Wow.
So we got, and Atlanta has been bringing in money. We were less than 1 million people when I started as mayor. We're now 6.5 million people now.
Yeah.
And the jobs that have been, the 2,500 German companies in Atlanta.
Wow.
See, and they're hiring everybody. Yeah. And we gave them, when they came in, we gave them a list of minority contractors, and we said, look, business works better in this community if everybody has an opportunity to be employed.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is working, but people are now trying to say that because we're doing well, there must be some corruption. And, the lady running for mayor went to Douglas, and she was very smart. And her husband went to Southwest High School. And then went to University of Georgia, and she went to FAMU, and they both came back, went to Georgia State. And so they've been lawyers for 23 years. Yep. Now, when her husband went to work at Home Depot, it was just starting up. Yeah. And they could buy shares of stock for $2 a share.
Wow.
And so they had 4 children to take care of, so they had to save. Yep. So they bought a lot of stock for $2 a share. Wow. I looked it up just the other day. Home Depot stock is now $176.
Wow.
So if you bought a share of stock every time you bought a pack of cigarettes or Coca-Cola or beer, you'd have $1 million to buy a home too.
Right.
So because they learned that you not only have to work for money, you have to save money so that money can work for you.
Right, yes.
And that's what they're being criticized for.
Yeah.
And it's just that people cannot believe that God has blessed this community as much as we've been blessed.
Wow.
And maybe we don't deserve it, but we all survive only by God's grace and mercy.
Yes. Wow.
And that's what we're deciding next week. And I hope we get the same kind of turnout next week that we got when I was running for Congress, even if it rains.
Yes.
Because for me, it's a referendum not on politics, but it's a referendum on the future of Atlanta. And there's no other city I've been to in the world where people are getting along, black, white, brown, gay, straight, young, old, and we got it. Georgia State now has, I think, 160-some different countries represented in the 65,000 students they have there.
And they have a school there named in your honor.
Well, yeah. Because, I don't know. I went to the president of Georgia State back when I was mayor, and I said to him, look, there's something special happening here. Atlanta is different from any other city in the world. And I said, we need part of this university studying what happens in Atlanta so others can learn how to help people to get along. So they put the school, my name on the school, the Andrew Young School of Public Policy.
Yes.
At Georgia State.
Yep.
And people come from all over the world.
Yes.
And we don't know what impact we're having.
Yeah.
But with the Hope Scholarship, it's almost affordable.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford that, you can certainly go to Atlanta Metropolitan College for, what, I think $1,500 a year?
I think something like that.
And you can go, you can get a 4-year degree there.
Yeah.
But even the dual degree program in engineering or Atlanta Technical College, you can go to aviation management school. You can go to plumbing, air conditioning, maintenance. They have 98% of their people who come in there, no matter what their background academically and educationally or economically, 98% of them leave with a job.
Wow. That's
And
tremendous.
so there's no excuse for anybody not to succeed in this community.
Wow, that's so true. Wow. I want you to tell us what's been one of the greatest obstacles that you've had to overcome in your journey. And I know that you've had so many. So the challenge is trying to figure one out that really stands out in your mind.
Well, you know, the book I wrote about the civil rights movement, I named it An Easy Burden. And it came from the New Testament statement, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Wow. And what I learned in my life, and especially in the civil rights movement, that any task that God calls you to, he gives you the strength to survive.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's easy.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I have, the biggest obstacle is my own fears and doubts. And I've learned to trust in Jesus.
Oh, wow. Yes, yes.
And he never failed me yet.
Wow, yes.
And it's my own fears and doubts, and also the insecurity of my parents.
Wow.
My parents don't want you to run risks. Parents want you to be safe.
Yeah. Yep.
And I used to tell my parents, from the prophet, your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you.
Yes.
You can give them your love, but not your thoughts. For their thoughts come from a world that you cannot enter, even in your wildest dreams. And you gotta, they are like living arrows that are sent forth into the future. And as God loves the arrows that fly, he also loves the bow that is stable. I mean, it's a little poem about bearing children, caring for children, and letting them go.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah. It is.
And people make you doubt, people want you to doubt yourself. They'll always tell you, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And they'll have 1,000 reasons why you will fail.
Wow.
And it's the negativity around us that can only be overcome by faith.
Yes. Love it. Wow. Now, because you were a confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I want you to share something with us that's a funny incident that you remember of just some personal time with him.
Well, remember, I was with him from the time he was about, say, 29 or 30 to 39 when he was killed. And most of the times that he got most funny and humorous were times when we were scared. And he had a way of making you laugh at your fears. And he said, now, if we go over there in Birmingham, there ain't no remission of sins without the shedding of innocent blood. Some of us ain't gonna make it.
Wow.
And then depending on who he was feeling like picking on, he said, now, if they get you, I know they're trying to get me, but you're gonna be wanting to get your picture in the paper and jump in front of trying to get on television, and you'll take the bullet instead of me. But don't worry, I think I can preach even you into heaven. And then he'd start preaching your funeral. And he would be pleading your case before the Lord, which meant he would recite all of your sins, things that you didn't wonder, how did he know that? And he did it in a good old Baptist moaning spirit, and he'd have everybody cracking up. Because, he said, but Lord, he meant well. And you promised forgiveness. We just trusted in your forgiveness. We know we sinned. But I think that it was a way of dealing with death, because remember, by the time he was bombed first when he was 26.
Wow.
He was put in jail, stabbed when he was 27, 28. He was 29 when they sued him and took all his property and all of his things, and he came back to Atlanta because Dr. Daddy King and his mama wanted him to come into Atlanta where it was safe, and he needed a rest. And they started the sit-ins at Rich's, and the students asked him to come, and he went.
Wow.
They arrested the students and let them go.
Wow.
But nobody knows hardly that they didn't let him go. They took him over and put him in solitary in the DeKalb County jail. And back then, DeKalb County wasn't like it is now. In fact, that was when Stone Mountain was basically the Klan headquarters.
Yeah.
And so he was down on there near Stone Mountain. And they took him out, put him in chains, put him in the back of a paddy wagon, not knowing, in the middle of the night, not knowing where he's going. Nobody in the paddy wagon but a German Shepherd.
Wow.
And fortunately, he had dogs at home, and he was not afraid of dogs. And because he said every time he rolled, there were no expressways then. So he's driving, he didn't know where. He was sure that they were going to take him down to the Flint River somewhere and throw him in the water, and he'd end up. And this was his dying hour. And he was just 30 years old.
Wow.
No, yeah, 30 or 31. And I think that night, rather than have a nervous breakdown, I think God gave him an experience of life and death. But he'd already had it. Because see, when he got stabbed in Harlem, he used to make jokes about that. He said, I'm sure I'm glad I got stabbed in Harlem. Because if I'd gotten stabbed somewhere else, they might have pulled that knife out. And the knife was pressed against the main aorta of his heart. And he said, but I was cool in Harlem because they know how to deal with knife wounds.
Yeah, wow.
They pull knives out of brothers 3-4 times a week.
Wow.
A day. And so he'd talk about the preachers who came to visit him. And he said, it was like I had an out-of-body experience where I was up in the top of the hospital room, and see, he was young preachers, and the older preachers around New York were very uncomfortable with what we were doing.
Yeah.
And he said it was like I was looking down on them, and they were praying for me, and I wanted to tell them, don't pray too hard, brothers. I ain't gone yet. I'm still here. And he'd always laugh about that experience. So it was like he had so many experiences with death that he was just a matter of when.
Yeah.
Not, how or whether. He was deliberately putting his life in the hands of God. And I mean, he actually went to Memphis against everybody's advice.
Yeah.
But I think he knew the end was near, and he wanted to die with the poor. And he'd always tell us, you're going to die. and you don't have anything to say about when you die or how you die, but you're going to die. The only thing you can try to do is live the kind of life that when you die for something.
Yes, yes.
You know, and
Wow.
and people say that not only did he live the life of Christ, he was willing to die for his trust and beliefs, and it's 50 years.
Wow. Tell us how he got out of the paddy wagon. He was going down in South Georgia in the back of the paddy wagon.
Well, he didn't get out. They took him out and put him in solitary, and he didn't know where he was. He was in Reedsville Penitentiary, down in the hole. I mean, and so nothing could be more disturbing and disrupting and frightening to a young man in the South, and this was 1960.
Yeah.
But how God uses you, God used one of John Kennedy's assistants who had been a disciple of Gandhi.
Wow.
He had met Gandhi when he was 12 years old on a trip around the world with his rich grandmother.
Wow.
But he also, because he knew the impact of Gandhi and was from a rich Quaker family, he was the one that, as a young man, organized the money for Dr. Mays and Mordecai Johnson. There were 12 black college presidents that he arranged to go to the independence of India so that they could learn how Gandhi, who was a Hindu, practiced the teachings of Jesus.
Wow.
And made them politically powerful and relevant so that he took the whole British Empire, defeated them without getting angry and without killing anybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a demonstration of spiritual power.
Wow.
That those presidents came back and talked to us about. The year of India's independence was the year that I went to college, 1947. And Martin was already there. Martin was at Morehouse, and when Dr. Mays came back, and they were talking about the spiritual power of changing the world without killing anybody.
Wow. My God.
Now that has developed in Atlanta through not only the movement, but actually Jimmy Carter was the only president, maybe in the history of this country, who stayed 4 years in the White House, and not a single American killed anybody, and not a single American got killed.
Wow.
And yet he made peace all over the world.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So, you know, we here have been part of a movement that had to be sustained by God.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. Wow. Will you give Ambassador Andrew Young a wonderful hand for his time, his wisdom? This is a living legend among us. He's just a national treasure for us, his encyclopedic memory of the years, and wow, what a gift, what a gift, what a gift. We need to do this again. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and the time just flies when you're having fun. Will you ever come back? Will you come back? He said he'll come back anytime, anytime. Wow, wow. I don't know, do you know our dear relative of Martin Luther King, Reverend Clarice Church right here? You know this sweet lady? Wow. Have you guys been blessed tonight? Did this give you a side of him that you didn't know? Have you heard another? Wow, what a rich experience, seminary trained, and just been doing the work of the gospel. It seemed that God used women to thrust him into the various positions of his life. He's had a woman bossing him around for so many.
Well, you know, she went on to glory.
Yes.
23 years ago now.
Yes. Yes.
And the Lord sent me another one.
He did, Carolyn.
The same kind, Carolyn,
Yes.
school teacher, member of Reverend Wilburn's church, Sunday school superintendent.
Yes.
And it was almost mystical
Wow.
that when we came back from the UN, Carolyn's best friend was teaching with a lady who had been Jean's best friend before we left.
Wow.
And so my son, Bo, went to school with them every morning.
Oh, wow.
And as she began to transition, she didn't worry about me, but she was worried about her children and grandchildren.
Yeah, wow.
And she'd think of more reasons why Carolyn ought to come over. Wow. And it was almost like I didn't have anything to say about that either. You know, really, now this, let me tell you this. And the ambassador from South Africa,
Yes.
After Mandela had just gotten, no, he wasn't even out of jail yet.
Wow.
No, yeah, he'd just gotten out, came to Atlanta, and I was driving him around to see what Atlanta's like. And we were coming down Peachtree, and he said, I didn't realize you had such ethnic diversity here.
Wow.
And we were just getting next to Peachtree Battle, and I said, well, there's a school right here where they have children, I think from 32, 34 different nations in an elementary school. I said, when they come out, it looks like the UN. And it was 3 o'clock, so I said, let's go by. And I turned around and pulled up, and the children were coming out. And who was coming out but Carolyn Watson's 5th grade class, which looked like I said, a little United Nations. So I invited her over and introduced her to the ambassador. She said, can you all give me a ride home?
Wow.
My ride has got to stay, and I really need, you going back home? I said, yeah. She lived right over here on this side of town, Cascade. So she gets in the car, and the ambassador says, you know, you all need to get married in South Africa. And he said, the United States Embassy is right at the foot of Table Mountain. Wow. It's the most beautiful, peaceful spot in the world. That's where you all need to get married. I said, well, you know, and he let it go. But he went back, and the ambassador, who was ambassador from the United States to South Africa, was a friend of mine who had lost his wife to cancer a year earlier.
Wow.
And he was a preacher. I went to Yale Divinity School.
Wow.
And he made the mistake, he said, of dating.
Wow.
And he said, you can't date women over 40 casually. He said, you are their last hope. And he said, I made the mistake of thinking I could be friendly. He said, and when I got ready to get married, he said, I got married in the morning. I went to the White House and got sworn in as ambassador to South Africa, and we got on a plane and got out of there before anybody knew it. And he said, you need to come on over here and get married. I don't know who this woman is, but you need to get married now. He said, I said, well, I'm not dating anybody. He said, yeah, but there are a lot of people that got their eyes on you. And the sooner you become unavailable, the better off you and a lot of people. He said, you can do a whole lot of damage. You're still pretty young. He said, you're 60, but you look like you're 40. And so that's how I got married. Then the lady who's president of South Africa's wife, while Mandela was in jail, Adelaide Tambo, called me and said, Andy, who is this woman? I said, what woman? This woman you're gonna marry. I said, she cannot get married in Africa in an African dress. I must make her the wedding dress. I said, she said, give me her name. What's her name? I said, Carolyn. She said, what's her phone number? And so here, the president's wife of the African National Congress calls this school teacher and says, what's your favorite color? I must make your wedding dress, see? In the meantime, the ambassador is setting up a reception for me as a visiting dignitary, say, where Mandela and Bishop Tutu are all going to be there, and he's a minister. And he said, look, no, you don't need any papers in South Africa. It's just it's a religious celebration. And said, Bishop McKinley Young, who graduated from Clark with Carolyn, was the bishop in South Africa. And Bishop Tutu, Desmond Tutu, was Nobel Prize winner. Said, they're going to be there. We can get you married right quick. And so that's how I got married. I mean, if you let go and let God, see, and are willing to trust, you'll be surprised.
Wow, we need a part two. I'm just telling you, wow. And some of you don't know that. Is it Mugabe, who's in Zimbabwe? You had something to do with them when there was still Rhodesia in the settlement.
Well, you know, they said he was a Marxist terrorist.
Wow.
And when I met him, I realized that he'd been a Jesuit school teacher for 17 years. He's a devout Roman Catholic who believes in the New Testament literally. So they said he was a communist, but Jesus said you should give all that you have to the poor.
Wow.
And he was trying to construct a society like that. And he really didn't like white people for good reason. No, I mean, he'd spent 9 years in jail for trying to vote.
Wow.
And his wife was pregnant when he went to jail. His son lived only 5 years. So he never overcame the fact that he never met his son.
Wow.
See, and so he was a bitter old man.
Wow.
And so like this young man in Korea.
Yeah.
You know, Billy Graham used to go to Korea all the time and meet with his father. And then I just got back from Korea where they gave me an honorary degree at a Presbyterian university where his great-grandfather graduated.
Wow.
See, so one of the things that I've tried to do is whenever I go anywhere in the world, I try to find people who have somehow been a part of the life of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And I say that Martin Luther King's body was killed 50 years ago.
Yep.
But his spirit is more alive today, all over the planet, than it was 50 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And we know now that death is not an end.
Yeah.
But we released his spirit, and in his spirit, we need to continue the things for which he gave his life, and that is resolving the tensions and problems of the world by learning to love one another as God loves and forgives us.
Wow. Again, thank you, Ambassador, Mayor, Congressman, Diplomat. Wow. What a gift. What a gift. What a gift. Wow. I hope you've been as blessed as I have been just to be able to, you see, I could just drink from this fountain here just for weeks and months at a time. I tell you, what a treasure, what a gift, and what a learning experience about life. And we stress things out. You just let go and let God. My goodness, what a rich treasure. Wow.